Beaders, my name's Heather. I'm founder and owner of the Stitch Bead. Just wanted to do a quick introductory video to let you know what to expect from the channel. We're going to be focusing exclusively on techniques rather than showing you pieces that I've designed and then how to make them yourself. I'm going to give you the techniques and skills that you'll need to be able to create your own designs. I'll be showing you how to do the various stitches like peyote, herringbone, brick stitch and the other things that you may have heard about, and I'll be showing you how you can combine different beads to create different effects and thereby come up with your own pieces. I'll also be doing a series of business techniques for beaders. That will include things like how to set up your business, how to keep it simple books, how to do your stock control, and things like that you need to know if you're going to try and make money out of your beads. So if you have any business related beading questions, then please get in touch and I'll try and include a tutorial on them for you. And we'll be doing other things that will help you be a better beader and hopefully help you make some money out of your beads if you want to go down that route. So that's it for the introduction. Now I'm going to move swiftly on to the first tutorial, which is going to be just an introduction to seed beads and the different types and what you need to know when you're considering which ones to use in your projects. I hope you enjoyed the introduction and I hope you enjoy the tutorial that's to follow. Bye for now, see you next time. Hi, this is Heather from the Stitch Bead again. This is the tutorial on seed beads, which is going to hopefully give you everything you need to know when you're deciding which seed beads to buy for your projects. The first thing you're going to need to work out is which size you want. There are various sizes around and you'll hear them expressed as things like 15/0, 11/0 or 6/0 depending on the size of the bead. Now it might make sense to you that the bigger the bead, the larger the number. In fact, it actually works the other way round. The reason is that it is based on measuring how many beads per inch when they're laid down next to each other when you're working with them. And obviously these little 15/0s, you can get a lot more of those to the inch than you can these big 6/0s. So that's why it's in reverse order. The bigger the number, the smaller the bead. And that's something you're going to want to decide before you start designing your project, because obviously if you plan on using the little 15/0, your project is going to have a more refined, delicate look to it, but you're going to need an awful lot more beads than you are if you use a 6/0. On the other hand, if you use a 6/0 for something like peyote work, then you might end up with a project that looks like it's got something like the graphics from a 1980s computer program where you could see the individual squares. That might be perfectly fine because that might be the look you're trying to achieve. But if you want a more refined look, then you want to go for a smaller bead. And the most common bead used in bead weaving is probably the 11/0. Although there are 10/0s and 12/0s at the moment, which are slightly smaller or slightly bigger than the 11/0. The 11/0 is kind of the standard 2mm bead that people use. The when I say 2mm bead, I'm referring to the diameter of the bead from here to here, so it's a diameter across. And in respective order, the 15/0 is a 1.5mm diameter, the 11/0 is a 2mm diameter, the 8/0 is a 3mm diameter, and the 6/0 is a 4mm diameter. Now there is going to be some variation in the diameters of the bead, and that generally comes down to the different manufacturers having and the manufacturing tolerance of the equipment they use to make the beads as to how precise the bead is to the measurements. It can be something up to about, I've noticed up to about 0.4 millimeters difference in the diameter of the beads. That's in Chinese seed beads. So some will be almost half a centimetre bigger or smaller than others. So that's something you're going to want to consider if you're doing a piece of bead weaving in particular, is the more precisely the bead is made, the neater your work's going to finish. Now, Miyuki are famed for having very precisely manufactured beads, and they're more or less of a uniform size, as close as to current technology allows. And if you're doing something like peyote work or loom work, then that's going to be important, because if you're using uneven beads, then your work's going to look uneven and it's not going to look as professional when it's finished. The Toho beads are not bad, and then it kind of goes down. Check beads, okay, and then the Chinese beads, which are okay, but you really wouldn't want to use those for loom work. You're going to have to do a lot of sorting, and I'll show you what I mean. These are Chinese 11/0s. Now, for some projects like embroidery and fringe necklaces, where you're going to use a lot of beads, then, and it's going to be so busy that nobody's going to notice slight variations, then these cheaper beads are great. But for peyote work or loom work, I wouldn't recommend them. And the reason for that is that you're going to see that all these beads are slightly different sizes, and that's going to leave your work looking very uneven. I would have to go through and pick out individual beads that say, yes, that one's more or less right, that's okay, it's similar to that one's more or less okay. But this little skinny guy I really wouldn't want to use, so I'd be picking out beads as I was going along, and that's time consuming. It might be worth it if you've got a lot of time in your hands, but if you're trying to work to a deadline, it's going to take up a lot of time. And you have to consider whether the extra cost of the more precisely made Miyuki beads or Toho beads is worth it against the time that you're going to spend sorting out which beads you can use. I mean, you can see from this pile, I'm fairly happy with most of these. But these little skinny guys I really wouldn't want to use, and I probably wouldn't want to use that big fat one either. So it's entirely up to you, and it depends on, as I say, on the project. I do use these if I'm doing a fringe necklace, because you're going to use so many beads that it costs a fortune. If you're making them with Miyuki beads, you'd probably get through a couple of tubes on the fringe alone. Now, the other thing that you need to know is that Toho beads, they're pretty good. They're similar standard to Miyuki, and they're also sometimes preferred to the Miyuki for the reason that they have a bigger hole. So if you're doing a project with a lot of, where you're going to pass the thread through the bead several times, you might want to consider using the Toho bead over the Miyuki for that reason. Now, there's absolutely no reason to use one brand exclusively unless you particularly want to. You can mix and match. I wouldn't mix and match just different brands of beads in the same project, but depending on which project you want, then you can feel free to choose beads that are appropriate to the project. If you're making pieces that you want to be fairly cheap, then you may want to look to the cheaper beads. If you're making something that you want to look classy and expensive, then you may want to look to the more expensive, more precisely made beads. And certainly if you're doing bead weaving, loom weaving or peyote, then you'll probably want to look at the Miyuki. The other bead that you will hear referred to a lot are these Delica beads, and these are preferred for loom work and for peyote. These are size 11/0, they're 2mm in diameter from across the top of the bead here to here, and you'll see from the side of them, if you compare them to this one here, or this one here, these are kind of rounded on top. These are flat and they're more cylindrical in shape, and that means that when you're putting them by side, they're going to stack nicely, like little Lego bricks. They're going to sit one on top of each other, one next to each other, really tightly, which is why they're preferred. They do give your work a nice even finish. So if you're doing a lot of peyote work or loom work, then you want to be looking at the Delica beads. The Toho do make Delica beads as well, so again it's up to you to decide which brand you want to use, and it's entirely your preference, and although you may have to accept the fact that your work may have a slightly different look to it than a project that somebody's done using a different brand of bead, because of the precision in the engineering that goes into making the beads. Now, once you've decided which brand you want, then you need to know which finish you want. There are various finishes. There are matte finishes and frosted finishes, which are good if you don't want your beads to look shiny. If you don't mind them looking shiny, then you might want to go for an opaque bead or a luster bead. Or if you want them to look really shiny, then you might want to go for a rainbow finish or an AB finish, which have different colours in the coating, and that's going to kind of make it look slightly different from different angles, and it gives a really nice effect to your project. There are iris finishes, which is also a version of the rainbow, but it's particularly used on metallic beads. Metallic beads look like this one, where they actually look like metal, and some of them are actually plated with metal. Mayuki even do a 24 karat gold plated one. So there's also silver lined beads. These have a sort of foil lining going around the hole, and they give your work a nice shiny effect, although you do need to be aware that it does make the hole slightly smaller. So again, if you're doing a project where you're going to pass through the beads several times, it's something to take into consideration whether you want to use a bead with a lining. If you're planning on doing something like that, I would avoid the lined beads for that reason. It's going to make it harder for you to pass your thread through the bead without breaking the bead. I think that's all you need to know about seed beads. There are a numerous variety of them, so you can spend several hours looking through websites, finding the beads that you like, and the way you combine them, you can use different sizes within the same project to create various effects, and we'll be looking at those in some future videos. And I was showing you also how to create effects by combining seed beads with other beads like pearls and crystals, and sometimes we'll be using the seed bead as the main bead, and other times we'll be using the pearls or crystals as the main bead and using the seed beads as embellishment. So they are a very flexible bead, and you'll soon build up a collection of different colours, different sizes, and you'll be able to pick and choose which ones you want to use to make different effects on your finished project. I hope you found that information useful. If you do have any suggestions, please feel free to comment. If you have any techniques or any beading questions that you would like to see covered in future videos, then also please feel free to comment or to get in touch. And I look forward to speaking with you again in the next video. Bye!